So you can see there basically what I've done during most of my professional career. I'm a medical oncologist. I've got an interest in drug development and have been conducting phase 1 and translational trials for about 30 years, and have done so both through the ECMC and the CRF contexts. So most of you, I guess, here will have some familiarity with cancer research, but my guess is that if we took a straw poll of people in the room, that cancer researchers will be relatively underrepresented in the CRF community compared to maybe the general incidence of cancer and cancer deaths. And I think one of the reasons for that has been the somewhat parallel development alongside the NIHR CRF network of the Experimental Cancer Medicines network. And it's within the ECMCs that much of the early phase cancer work is conducted. Now, the ECMCs were established in 2007, but they go back about 5 years earlier, and their genesis was out of the review of cancer services and the poor cancer outcomes at the turn of the century that led to the establishment of all of the new clinical services for cancer, and the spin-out of that was what was called NTRAC, which 5 years later was reinvented as the ECMCs. And this is now a network, as you see there, of 18 adults, but also 11 pediatric centers. You can see them, their geographical location. And they're basically looking to do much of what we would within the CRF to provide world-class clinical trials, to deliver these efficiently, to deliver these safely, collaborating with academics, but also with industry. Just say something about the pediatric network, because the adult and the pediatric networks, although they're managed through the same central office at CRUK with support from NIHR, there are some subtle differences. The adult ECMCs are rather like the CRF networks in that we go around for about 4 years saying how collaborative we are and how friendly we are and how much we're all in this together. And then for 12 months we have a competitive process while we all compete for the same money. Within the pediatric world, they've got a different, perhaps more sophisticated approach in that this is a complete network that is funded through a single application. The process is underway in the pediatric and the adult networks at the moment for the ECMCs. So this is much more a coordinated network as a whole rather than competing against each other. Another thing which I think is interesting, and it again is made possible and made necessary by the relative rarity of a lot of the childhood cancers, is that if you look at the country divide there, you can see not only the pediatric ECMCs, but you'll see those little lines going across, dividing the country up. And what the pediatric ECMCs have done is organize themselves into mini networks where they don't necessarily all have all the trials open at each of the centers, but they actively look to cross-refer between those centers, which is a model that we maybe could look at more widely within adult ECMCs and within the CRFs. The ECMC vision is summarized on this, and many of these slides I've borrowed from the CRUK ECMC Secretariat, so thank you to them. But again, the aims, I think, are common to what we would see through the CRFs in terms of delivering the early phase and translational research. The competitive element is not meant to be competing with each other, but to do so in an efficient and safe manner, and making and increasing access of patients to trials. Clearly, sustainable workforce, collaborative working are key. The accessible research is an interesting note. There are fewer ECMCs than there are CRFs, and CRUK isn't in the model currently of expanding the number of those ECMCs. So there is a discussion to be had within the ECMCs as to how the ECMCs engage more widely with their local communities to increase access, or how the CRFs engage more widely, given their greater geographical spread, to see how they can engage and support cancer early phase trials more widely. The ECMC network, it consists of what you see there. It's providing infrastructure, not estate. This is people, essentially, that it's funding. Research nurses, coordinators, and laboratory staff to deliver translational work. And the studies are very much early phase translational studies with some biobanking activity as well. And this leads to a range of activities there. You see the numbers of patients that have been recruited, 30,000 patients, 2,100 early phase trials, and the infrastructure there, which is similar to the CRFs. There's a research nurse forum, the PPI groups, there's support for investigator training. And what is looked for is to try and facilitate this path, again, in a way that would be familiar to us in the CRF context. A number of specific elements have been developed in a very much a network manner through the ECMCs. One of these is a trial finder, so this is a way to search for trials for particular types of cancer, particular molecular phenotypes, so helping patients, but also investigators match patients onto trials. The ECMC network has been very successful. You see there a number of trials that were conducted by the top 10 tumour types there. There's a large number of studies set up within 80 days in many cases, and again, many of these are international as well as local trials. Workforce is important. I'll just pick up on one aspect, and that's around the investigators, but the ECMC does support the research nurses and others. But I think one of the successes of the ECMC has been this, what has been an annual meeting to train early career clinical and laboratory researchers in early phase trials and translational research. This was held remotely during the COVID pandemic, but was held face-to-face or in a hybrid model earlier this year. And there's now a large cohort of people from a range of different centres that have been through this process. And again, this is open not only to the adult investigators and trainees, but also to the paediatric groups. Another network activity that has been successful is what we call ECMC North. And one of the things we struggled with in the ECMC was that with 20 ECMCs spread across the whole country, and with the competitive background, it was often quite difficult actually to get everybody pulling in the same direction at the same time, difficult to get people together. Sometimes difficult to get people to admit the things that they didn't do well and that other people might do better. So as part of our earlier ECMC application 5 or 6 years ago, we proposed that we set up an ECMC North, which was intended not merely to exclude people from the south, which, you know, Northerners would never want to do that. But it was not intended to exclude the Southerners, but was intended to try and get us down to a manageable number of sites who could actually sit in the same room and be quite open with each other. A little bit like we have done during the COVID pandemic, where everybody was obliged to come together and work collaboratively. It started just with Sheffield, Leeds, and Newcastle. It's expanded a bit there. You see, we've even branched out to Northern Ireland and to Scotland. But again, that has proved effective. It's been a small enough group that we've been able to hold an educational event. We've had a number of outputs that have come from this. We've now got a trial that is being set up and that will open, that specifically will run, at least initially, through the ECMC North. So that, I think, has been one of the successes and is something that we're hoping to continue during the next funding round. So the CRS and the ECMCs, they do have similarities. Clearly, they're both NIHR funded. There's significant geographical overlap. There is a shared focus on experimental medicine trials and this aspiration to work as a network, albeit in a competitive environment. The network groups and the support are similar, and there's a shared commitment to PPI and increasingly to EDI. But they do obviously differ. The ECMCs are looking at essentially a single disease, albeit one as heterogeneous as solid tumours and haematological malignancies. There's a shared funding model, so CRUK is providing the funding, so we're looking partly at NIHR, but also at CRUK in terms of our masters. The ECMC funding is at a lower level, and before the CRU take that as a complaint, we've been very grateful that whereas the CRUK centres, and if you like equivalent to the BRCs in your world, the CRUK centres took a major cut in their funding, the ECMCs were able to retain level funding, but it is still at a more modest level than the CRFs. Is there a good reason for these to be separate processes? Part of the reason they're separate is historical, but there are, I think, other good reasons. In most, or if not, in many, if not most hospitals, cancer services are located in a discrete area. Some cancer hospitals are on a separate site to the general hospital. So I think there are particular needs for people with cancer. And when we do early clinical trials in people with cancer, that's very often in people who've got only a few months to live. So this is a very different population to a healthy individual having an infusion for a physiology study. These are patients who need a particular type of care. So I think there are legitimate reasons for having something that is tailored to people with cancer. And as I say, the ECMCs in many cases link or look to the CRUK centres rather than the BRCs, although there is some overlap there. So what do I see? Well, I see that there are different models between whether a joint ECMC or shared on the same site, ECMCs and CRFs. Some are all very fully integrated, some are almost completely divorced, and probably the commonest model is that they're partially integrated, and that they work alongside each other, and there's some sharing of expertise and some sharing of facilities. But certainly my own prejudice is that there are opportunities for working more closely. I think there are opportunities around workforce development, education, QA, governance, PPIE, EDI, all of which are common and shared and shouldn't be duplicated. There will be, if you like, high-level skills that will be specific to cancer or other particular conditions, but that doesn't apply across the whole workforce. And our cancer nurses, our cancer CTAs were supporting the vaccine studies. Some of them still are. So I think there is a lot to be gained from that flexibility. And certainly in our own model, just to end briefly, Leeds, we're a big trust, one of the biggest trusts in the country. We've got now have a CRF, an NIHR CRF, which is run out of the Research and Innovation Centre in the middle there, which the senior management team is based in. But then we have 5 delivery CRFs seeking to deliver the clinical trials in diseases that are managed clinically on those particular sites, so trying to map the research onto the clinical activity. The majority, if not all, of the adult oncology work is done on the St James's site. And there's the CRF we've got on the St James's site. So this is the largest of our CRFs. But we also have a paediatric site where the paediatric cancer work is done. And the group of nurses who you see in the bottom left, or nurses and other support staff, these are, some of them will be people who are based full-time on the CRF. Others are people who work in other research teams, within, for example, within the breast cancer team, who come and work with the nurses on the CRF to deliver the trials. Similarly, hematology people. We're doing an increasing amount of people coming in from the clinical areas to do secondments, hoping to spread the philosophy and interest in research in that way, and also looking at doing more outreach work where our teams go onto the wards, again, trying to drive the philosophy and the enthusiasm around research. And whereas I think, like most places, we're struggling around startup and the restart after the COVID pandemic, but we have been more successful in the CRF than in other areas of research, and are trying to use this as a driver to help research get back on its feet across the wider RNI in Leeds. So for me, those are the conclusions, that the benefits, I think, outweigh any potential disadvantages of working more closely, although the famous one-size-fits-all model I wouldn't say would work. And I'll thank you for your attention, and then finally just thank James Spicer, who I chatted to, and Sarah Danson in Sheffield about the CRFs and the ECMCs, and you see there the contacts and the names of some of the ECMC folk, at least one of whom I think is in the audience. Thank you, Saul.